You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options. Facebook.com/TheOptionsInsider or via questions at TheOptionsInsider.com.
Join us now for the expert source for inside information on the options markets. It's time for Options Insider Radio with your host, Mark Longo.
Welcome back to Options Insider Radio, the program where we welcome on guests from throughout the world of options and proceed to pick their brains for the benefit of you, the listener. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as from the ever-expanding, ever-exciting, ever-interesting Options Insider Radio Network. If you haven't had a chance to check out our most recent addition to the network, listeners, I encourage you to surf on over to wherever you find this program, wherever you download your favorite podcast, and check out our new Trading Tech Talk program. It dives into a lot of the interesting stuff that's lighting up the market right now, including all of the frenzy over HFT and Flash Boys. If that stuff interests you or concerns you, check out that show. I think you'll find it very interesting. And while you're doing that, of course, be sure to download our new Options Insider Radio Network mobile app. You can find it for iOS, Android, even Amazon Kindle Fire. Allows you to stream all of your favorite programs on the network, download them for offline listening, and even sending questions, comments, feedback to the hosts of your favorite programs. A lot of great stuff in that app. Check it out. I think you're going to like it. All right, listeners, and joining me on the show today, we have a very special guest. I can't believe he's never been on our network in all the years that we've been around. So I'm very happy, very excited to finally get him on. He is Tony Saliba, the Executive Managing Director over there at ConvergEx Group, as well as the CEO of Liquidpoint, as well as myriad other things in the options space. The first options guy really to be profiled in that seminal tome, Market Wizards. You've been around forever, done it all. Tony, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Mark. Great to be here. Thanks.
It's quite an intro. I probably didn't do it justice. Why don't you go ahead and give our listeners maybe a brief rundown of your background in the space?
Well, it started, I thought I was starting late at the exchange in 1978, but
turned out to be a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time, 36 years now. And this month, well, the month we just concluded, April, was the 25th anniversary of Market Wizards, so that's kind of interesting. Kids in college.
Has it been around that long?
Yeah,
Amazing.
they still read it.
I read that book when I was in school. Yeah.
Exactly, and I'll go to events and people will come up to me in their finance class. They have read that book, and I'm the only options guy in the book. So
you're to blame for luring me to Chicago
yes.
and all of the horrors
Hopefully
that have resulted.
It worked out well for you. But for the most part, heavily involved in fintech with in and around the options industry. Liquidpoint, exclusively providing services to options users. And I think we're uniquely positioned, Mark, because nobody does what we do that doesn't have a liquidity arm. So we're, what have you done for me lately? Live and die by our execution quality.
Tony, you were one of the early guys, I think, to see the writing on the wall for market making and take that transition into, like you said, the fintech side, because there was clearly opportunities in there. You started Liquidpoint. It's now become part of BNY ConvergEx and all the benefits that confers to you guys. I'm sure there are quite a few of our listeners out there who may not be familiar with exactly what you guys do over there at Liquidpoint. So why don't you go ahead and give us the 10,000-foot summary of what it is that you guys do?
Well, Liquidpoint caters to institutions, both broker-dealers and non-broker-dealers that trade options. So we don't handle any retail clients, but we do have retail client firms, some of the discounters. We deliver everything from front ends to routing systems, routing algos, pipes, full connectivity. Some of our flagship properties, BrokerPoint, connects a lot of upstairs and downstairs floor-based brokers. So codification once, all the mods that that happen with orders, staging, grandparent, parent, child type breaking up. We're the first to actually automate multi-leg order spreads with our iSpreads products, 13 years old now. But we have a what we call our UCOB, our universal complex order book, where we bring all of the complex order books together on one screen so you can see all the opportunities there. So we're everything options, order management windows, position management windows. We have 90% of the users are on our software for portfolio margining calculations. We have about 2,500 terminals around the country. Any given day, we handle about 6 million contracts, 4 to 6 million.
Obviously, a lot of our institutional users are familiar with you, and a lot of our retail listeners probably have used something you've produced, even if they're not aware of it. So you guys have outreach in a lot of different areas of the space. I want to hit on one thing you just mentioned because it's very top of mind for a lot of our listeners. You mentioned the complex order book system. You guys have had it now for 13 years, automating that functionality, which is hard to believe it's been around for that long. But that's a very contentious point in the space right now. If you bring up one problem that seems to hit institutional as well as the higher end of the retail category, if you're doing even simple 10-lot multi-legged spreads, you're starting to encounter some of the difficulties executing across multiple venues. You have a spread where one leg may be bid on the CBO, offered on the ISC or whatever. Never the twain shall meet. And so a lot of these people have issues with trying to do spreads on the MBBO or around it, sometimes even through it, and not getting filled. What's your take on that, obviously as someone who's been very active in that space for quite a while, on the issue we're seeing crop up with spread execution in the space? And what are some ways you think, or maybe some solutions you think that could help facilitate that type of execution across all of these myriad siloed venues that we have now?
Right. So you have the 12 exchanges, they have their legs, and then you have 5 of the exchanges have complex order books.
All of whom are not incented to send those orders away
in any way,
shape, or form.
And they're not synced up. You're right, absolutely. So it's a wonderful question. It's an exact point. And it boils down to execution risk. Okay, so if it's on one exchange, certain exchanges will leg into the legs of their exchange if it's not on their complex order book. That's easy because it stays within the exchange. So when you go outside of the exchange, you really need an agent. We're a broker-dealer also, and there's execution risk because what happens if one of the legs moves, right? So we do have an algo, so our users, it's called a legger, it's not such a sexy name, but that algo, when our users enter a spread order, it'll optimize the order for whichever complex order book is there, and then if that volume is exhausted at the complex order books, it will remain resident looking for the legs because we'll take the leg risk. I happen to know that for smaller clients, not that we compete in that space, but Interactive Brokers does the same thing for their retail clients to some degree. The difference is, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but we don't trade against our order flow, so we don't have an error account really. And you know how it is, we've always said as market makers on the floor, I'd rather get into a good spread at a bad price than just take a loss on a single leg.
Yes. So you guys will actually take the delta risk then of legging a spread for your clients if they're using your spread legger?
Yes, within a degree. I mean, depending on who the client is, whatever, we can modify the algo, but we absolutely do. If it's there, our stuff is so fast. If it's there, we can get it. If you can see it, you can get it. It's when it flickers and such that you start one side and don't get the other.
Because that seems to be the missing component. No one seems to be willing to do that. The implied functionality on ISC and others, they'll leg between their own books, which you said is simple, and they're not routing an order away. But no one wants to take that leg risk to go across to another exchange and help facilitate that fill. I think it does fall to the third parties. So I'm glad to see that you guys are doing that at least and helping facilitate it. Because until someone is willing to step up and do that, this problem is going to pretty much remain unfixed.
Well, some of our clients are upstairs brokers, and they use the technology. So some of your listeners may be using them for brokerage. But if you're on our software, yes, you'll get that. And that is an issue. And I don't see the exchanges coming together to fix that, because just like linkage, they'll argue about who wants the credit for that order.
Yes,
right?
they all want their piece of the pie.
Right.
Do you think it is a technological solution like something you proposed, or you think it may require at the end of the day, the long arm of the SEC to step down and say, okay, you exchange, these order books now need to talk to each other?
Well, ultimately, that's probably where we might go. I don't think we need to. I sure hope we don't, because back in the day, maybe 10 years ago, there was the notion of a consolidated order book where you had one national order book and we wouldn't have 12 exchanges today. And I don't think that's tenable, especially in multi-legs. But I do think, and I know that some of the larger firms have been talking to the exchanges about harmonizing some of the rules and some of the connectivity. I do think that there should be some standards before an exchange launches a spread book, for instance. And now that there's a handful of them out there, you have you have templates to go on. So look, I'm all about less regulation. I really think that we're overly regulated as an industry. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have regulations. I'm just saying that there's some regulations that don't lead anywhere, that don't fix anything and don't help anything. But it takes time and costs money, and there's no there. So I hate to say for complex order books that there should be standards set. I think there should, but it should be somebody like SIFMA, for instance, an internal industry organization rather than the SEC or even FINRA.
You have more faith in SIFMA. I guess that makes sense. A lot of people,
users.
Most people in the option space, not big champions of the SEC, probably even less of FINRA, even though they're supposed to be the specialized version, but not a lot of fans of them either. Talking about the exchanges, since we're on that tip anyway, you just came off of moderating the Exchange Leaders Panel. As someone who's had that dubious honor in the past, you did a good job. It's a difficult challenge. Try to make that panel interesting every year, the same players, the same discussions. How do you make how many exchanges? It's too many, a scintillating topic yet again, but you did an admirable job, so hats off to you.
Thank you.
Only a handful of people know how difficult that job is, so I understand. But it is interesting talking about the exchanges, talking about the spread books and the fragmentation they're in. That's obviously a big topic here at the conference, and it is every year. And I think it's interesting looking at the proliferation of trading venues we've had over the past decade. As you mentioned, we have a dozen exchanges now. That's quite a few liquidity venues. That's quite a few different technologies to have to connect to. It's quite a few pricing schemes and everything else. And as you know, being on the fintech side for so long, as you add layers of complexity, you add a lot of potential points of failure. We saw quite a few high-profile technology failures in the option space in 2013. Just saw the latest one this week with NYSE having to bust nearly 500,000 contracts just a couple of days ago. So I'm curious to you, as someone who's been around the space for a while, active in the technology side, do you think this continued proliferation of trading venues and all the fragmentation and complexity therein is contributing to the frequency of these errors? And do you think maybe it's time for the industry as a whole to maybe take a step back and start looking at what the values of adding additional venues are versus the risks associated with it?
Well, I do. I think that proliferation has caused potential problems. It's pretty simple. If a rule changes in our world, well, let's say when we were on the floor and there wasn't really any electronic access, a rule changes, you tell everybody, and they have to do something to conform to a rule. Today, if a rule changes, and that may even involve a fee structure change or a new order, it becomes code. It becomes technology that has to be, designed and written and tested and retested and then live tested, production tested. So every time something happens today, it's a technology change. Okay? Technology, big euphemism for this whole structure. And when that happens, you do start to bring in points of failure. Now, there's a lot more failure than we're talking about because you're just talking about the big ones. There's little issues, here and there every day, but you get over them. The more venues you have, and think about it, they're competing with the same product. It's a strip mall with 12 exchanges with selling the same, or 12 storefronts selling the same product for the most part, take away single lists, and they need to differentiate themselves. Nobody wants to differentiate solely on price, so now they have to get creative. So you have fee structures, and you have different rules, and you have little gadgets, if you will. And yeah, it becomes a labyrinthical structure that the technology companies have to fight with. And the bigger shops, given the Ready Consortium, for instance, it's too expensive to do all this in-house. Everybody's recreating the wheel, for the most part. So a firm like ours, which lives and dies on our execution, and all we do is cater to this, we've been picking up a lot of business because people are crying uncle and saying, I can't keep up. And
costs are just too crazy.
Yeah. So the failure that you mentioned, Mark, that's the scary part. One of the questions that, the last one that I mentioned and didn't get a lot of time because we ran out of time.
On the
panel today, was should the government or the or OCC or some organization urge the exchanges to provide kill switches, for instance? Just simple. You're having a bad day in the crowd, you lost track of your position, you step out of the crowd. You're not just going to keep trading until you figure out your position, right? You definitely aren't going to have more inbounds. So that's a big issue. The issue of risk, which we started to talk about a little bit, it isn't black and white. You have moments where you're redlining, but you're not over your limit. So you have a green, yellow, red sort of scenario in your own trading. And that's the way every shop pretty much would look at things. That's the way the exchange structure should look at it. So now the Knight problem, or and that was in equities, but the Goldman problem where they send in all the orders, somebody should say, hey, you're sending more than you normally send. Are you sure you want to do that? Maybe wake them up a little sooner. So as a technology company, we have a lot of solutions. They're not all camera ready for everybody to use. But as I mentioned, our BrokerPoint system handles all the 15C3-5 market access for all the floor brokers and some upstairs traders. And we can give them switches where their bosses decide, or they decide, what kind of flow goes to the market. It's dumb. I mean, it's a fat finger type of thing, but it is a level of blocking that everybody's using because that's what the government's mandated, just very basic rules. I guess it could get some of us that know a lot about options in a room and say what would make the most sense to keep us safe. The Amex ARCA problem on Monday was unfortunate because all those players that put in spreads, which is the best product to trade, got screwed somehow, by accident because of a system failure, and that's really unfortunate.
I hate to keep going back to the notion of regulation. I know you're not a big fan. I'm typically not a big fan myself, given what we've seen and the unintended consequences. But again, how do we effectively put the brakes on this? Is it something the industry as a whole is going to start saying this is too much? I think you mentioned the OCC. I think that's an interesting idea. OCC maybe getting a little bit more active on the regulatory side as opposed to FINRA or some of the others because they get the space. When do we get to that point when we put the brakes on? Or is that never going to happen? We just keep adding new venues and eventually some will drift away because they're de minimis and the new ones will come in?
Well, I mean, as much as I say that I think we have too much regulation because there seems to be a lot of regulation that doesn't have the right value, okay? If you understand options, like you and I do, and most of your listeners do, you understand where the sweet spot is, so to speak, okay? So the notion of edge is not something that is in the equity world, right? So the regulators, do they understand options enough to know where the sweet spot is? Do they understand that maker-taker is somewhat of a bastardization of an exchange system? That as a market maker, I can change my prices so I get paid properly when you trade with me. You know, to incentivize me to trade more by paying or post prices by paying me, I think tries to reverse the flow of the river. My opinion about what we should do is get rid of pennies widen the markets, and anybody who wants to trade in pennies selects that on their order, and they go into the auction.
They can improve in an auction. Yeah.
Think about it. All the mitigation of all those quotes, traffic, data traffic drops significantly, costs go down because our costs are huge. Data center costs, our data rate costs. I mean, we're a market data vendor. But let the market makers, as we used to say on the floor, be high, wide, and handsome, and make the markets where they're going to do the size so they don't have to, quote, change every jitter of the underlying. It'd be as competitive as it could ever be. And for the smaller client, be they institutional or retail, who wants price improvement, jump into that auction. All those big guys are going to have their smaller volume to price improve right down almost to the midpoint. We can do it. The technology's there. And then that starts to change a lot of the cost structure, of the stress on the system in terms of the data rates, quote mitigation, the whole thing. So that's there. And I haven't made a big deal about it, but I think there's a lot of people that say, we don't need to post in pennies. Educate the marketplace that you can do better than what's on the screen and go right into that pip, pim, aim, pixel. Forgot what the cube is, the new Amex.
Many different names for the same thing. Yeah. But you're right. We've talked about regulation and the unintended consequences of regulation. Pennies are very much in that camp. For years, people tried to argue against payment for order flow to the regulators, to the SEC, and they continued to punt on that and say, we're investigating, and eventually they implemented pennies as kind of a backdoor way to try to address that. I never really understood the logic of it. They wanted to try to squeeze liquidity providers more so they had less money to pay for payment. I think that was the logic.
You're right.
So they disenfranchised a class that was already highly disenfranchised and led to the scenario we have now where penny-wide HFTs flickering in and out and things like that. Liquidity providers are leaving the business en masse as a result, which I don't think was the intended consequence.
Which is so sad.
I think anyone who could look down the road a little bit would see that would be a result of that. So we're living in a penny world, which is in and of itself unintended consequences of regulation. And you're right. It seems like the natural liquidity for some of these products gravitates back to around a nickel or so, where there's just legitimate risk in an option. You can't do it in the penny. So I think that would be a very interesting proposal. I think a lot of people have said that, or at least have some sort of a mechanism to take names out of the penny quote-unquote pilot that don't really belong there. And then if people want pennies, they can go into a PIP. Those mechanisms exist. I think that would be an interesting thing. Unfortunately, the regulators don't seem eager to undo what they've already done. So I think we're kind of stuck with that. But since we're talking about regulation and pennies and HFT, that brings us to another big topic du jour at the conference. You touched on it a little bit on the panel today. Everyone seems to be obsessed with it these days. Of course, we are recording post-Flash Boys here. A lot of hysteria in the marketplace around this. Some of it right, some of it very, very wrong. I'm curious, as someone, again, who's been around the space for a while like you, what's your take on Flash Boys?
Well, on the book itself, which I read excerpts, a few chapters, did not complete the book, but many accounts of it, and of course seen Michael Lewis's interviews. I think it's very damaging to the industry. I think that most of it is overhyped and just not a very healthy thing. It's doing more damage than good. Okay, because to say the markets are rigged is a joke. That's incorrect. And Reg NMS can be blamed for this, okay, if there's a blame to be had. But I think that latency arbitrage is a natural progression of an arms race, okay? I'm not condoning it, but shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And for the bulk, and this is in the equity world, and I don't play in the equity space. I'm in the option space, and the option space does not have this issue. All our market structure being different, completely different, where I'll complete my thought on the latency arbitrage, and that is nobody should be surprised of it, and the small investor whose time frame is different does not get hurt from it. The calculations that Michael Lewis did in the book, saying there's this tax based on what they were saying, they're taking risks to go out and find liquidity wherever it needs to be, bring it and get the order filled for the bigger orders. And the smaller orders, they have a longer time frame, investors, whatever. It's really inconsequential. But back to the option space. Our markets, we have best execution protection. We don't have TRFs, trade reporting facilities. We don't have dark pools that print outside of the exchanges. Everything is under the microscope. It's the crucible of price improvement. If anyone using the options product does not understand that, then they're not educated. And we are night and day from the equity market. So our high frequency trading, or our high frequency, is high frequency quoting. And market makers who are making markets on multiple exchanges may get filled on one exchange and pull a quote on another exchange in an effort not to get slammed. And that's just the nature of Delta, okay? You can't, I'm not telling you anything different that you don't know, and I'm sure your listeners know this, but you can't quote your best size in every strike up and down for every month. So the high frequency aspect is predominantly there. Tape racing or latency, yeah, we've had a latency balancing algo for 5 or 6 years because we recognize some exchanges are slower than others. So we want the orders to arrive at the same time so you don't have quote pulling. But if anything, the options customer, come on, most customers are trading at almost no commission. You heard the previous speaker to mine today, Andy Nibel from TAB. European clients are paying $5 and more per contract for their brokerage, for execution. The most abject retail client maybe pays, $1 or $2.
$1, yeah.
Yeah, right? So this is a good thing for our end users, and it's going to continue to get better. So the technology works for us. The high-frequency trading aspect is sort of a necessary component. Some get there sooner, and they have that advantage. But the notion that the SEC and DOJ need to look into high-frequency trading as being this evil. If you recall, in the flash crash, when Mayor Joe White did the analysis and thought that the flash crash was a cause of high-frequency traders pulling their bids and offers out of the marketplace, and then she wanted to mandate that they be there. So what is it? Are they good or are they bad? Well, probably it's because the regulators don't understand what is going on, and you just can't legislate these big blanket legislations. So, I hate to keep getting back to regulation, but we have a framework of rules we have to work within and hope we don't stick our pinky toe over the line.
That is the world we live in, unfortunately.
The preceding program was a production of the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.